In a forgotten village at the edge of the Wordwood Forest, nestled beneath a veil of ancient mist, there stood a crooked little bookshop called the End and the Beginning. It was run by an old woman named Mistress Alira, whose eyes sparkled like moonlit ink and whose hair smelled faintly of lavender and parchment. The shop was known for its collection of strange and out-of-print tomes, dusty scrolls, and volumes bound in peculiar hides. But none of her wares were stranger than the book kept behind a glass cabinet, locked with a silver key and watched over by a black cat named Tansel. It was known only as the book that wrote back. Most who entered the shop didn't notice it. Those who did were usually brushed off with a quiet, not for sale. But the legend of the book remained, a leather-bound volume that could write its own words, answer your questions, and even change its story depending on who held the pen. 12-year-old Nalin stumbled into the shop on a rainy Thursday. He was looking for something to read, something real, not the predictable stories they read at school. He had no father, a sick mother, and a mind bursting with questions no one could answer. The bookshop was warm, dry, and filled with smells he couldn't name. He was drawn instantly to the locked cabinet. Mistress Alira noticed. "You've got curious eyes," she said, voice like creaking floorboards. "That book only opens for those with questions the world can't answer." Nalin looked at the book. It had no title on its spine, just a silver quill engraved on the cover. "Can I try?" he asked. Alira studied him for a long time. Then, with a sigh, she pulled the silver key from around her neck and unlocked the cabinet. The book was heavy in his hands, warm almost, as if it had a pulse. He opened to the first page. It was blank. "Right," Alira whispered. He hesitated, then took the fountain pen she offered. In neat handwriting, he wrote, "Who was my father?" The ink faded. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the paper rippled like the surface of a pond. Words appeared slowly, one by one. "Your father walked with shadows and drank from the glass of forgetting. He traded his name for a promise that was broken." Nalin blinked. It wasn't an answer. It was a riddle. But the more he read, the more the words pulled at something in his chest, like a thread being unraveled. He returned the next day, and the next. Each time, the book answered differently. Always cryptic, always poetic, always as though it knew him. It told of a city made of mirrors beneath a frozen lake, of a king with no kingdom who carried his crown in a sack, of a boy whose shadow ran faster than his body. Each tale ended with a symbol, a strange sigil that shimmered in the page and disappeared when he looked away. One day he asked, "Can you tell me the truth?" And the book replied, "Only if you're ready to live it." Weeks passed, and Nalin became obsessed. He started sneaking into the shop at night. The book grew stranger. It no longer waited for him to write first. Sometimes when he opened it, words were already there. Warnings. Questions. Why do you still ask when you do not listen? The truth is coming. Will you run? One night, when he arrived, the shop was cold. Alira was nowhere to be seen. Tansel hissed at him as he stepped near the cabinet. The book was open. Blood-red ink dripped from its spine. The page read, "He comes for the key. Do not speak his name." Before he could react, the bell above the door rang. A tall man entered, dressed in a cloak the color of coal smoke. His eyes were gold, unnatural and glinting like coins in a deep well. "I've come for the book," the man said softly. Nalin backed away, clutching it to his chest. "Give it to me, boy. It does not belong in your hands." But the book began to hum, vibrating against Nalin's ribs. He shouted, "What do I do?" The book answered in a voice he heard not in his ears but in his bones. "Write the end." He grabbed the pen, his hand shaking, and wrote. The man with no name turned to ash and blew away in the wind. There was a long, cold silence. Then, before the man could step forward, his cloak began to dissolve into dust. His skin cracked like old paint. With a final scream that sounded like thousands of voices, he disappeared. Nalin dropped the pen. His heart was pounding. The book closed itself. Mistress Alira returned the next morning. Her hair was damp with fog, her eyes sad. "You've seen the book's true nature," she said. "It is not a toy. It is a doorway." "A doorway to what?" Nalin asked. to truths too big for one life to carry. She poured him tea, silent for a time. The book only writes back to those it considers possible. Possible for what? I do not know. But it chose you. I don't want it, Nalin whispered. You already have it. He opened his bag. The book was inside, though he had left it on the counter. You must learn to ask the right questions, Alira said. And one day, perhaps you will be able to close the book for good. Years passed. Nalin grew older. He left the village, traveled far, met people whose lives had been touched by stories similar to his own. Strange tales that began with a question, ended with a sacrifice. He began writing, not just in the book, but outside of it, recording what he learned, creating his own volumes of truth and mystery. And yet, he never stopped carrying the book that wrote back. It whispered in his dreams. It warned him of dangers before they arrived. It wept ink tears when he lost someone he loved. And sometimes it wrote to him, not as a riddle, but as a friend. You are not alone. The story continues. You are the author now. One evening, in a distant land by a restless sea, Nalin sat with the book in his lap. He opened to the last page. It was blank. He picked up a pen, took a deep breath, and wrote. Once upon a time, there was a book that wrote back, but it no longer needed to, for its reader had learned to write his own ending. And for the first time, the book did not answer, because it didn't have to.